The wind howled across the barren Afghan mountains, carrying with it the dust of another long war. The stars blinked faintly above the valley, silent witnesses to battles fought in shadows. In the darkness below, a U.S. Navy SEAL team crept along the jagged ridge, every boot step deliberate, every breath measured. Their night vision goggles flickered in the moonlight, scanning for movement. But in these mountains, movement was often death. They had lost 3 men in 2 weeks, all to a single shot. No explosions, no chaos, no warnings, just the sharp, merciless crack of a sniper's bullet. Each time, the killer vanished before the echo faded. There were no footprints, no shell casings, no clues. Only the whisper of the desert wind. By now, everyone in Phobe Lion's Gate had heard the stories. Soldiers called them the Ghost Team, 3 enemy snipers working in perfect synchronization. Some said they were ex-Soviet mercenaries, veterans of forgotten wars. Others claimed they were locals, trained by the Russians decades ago, now fighting for whoever paid the most. All anyone knew was that once the Ghost Team locked onto a patrol, nobody survived. The SEALs had tried everything: drone sweeps, counter-sniper missions, thermal imaging. Nothing worked. The ghosts always knew when to strike, where to hide, and when to disappear. Even the best shooters in the unit couldn't locate them before losing another man. It was psychological warfare, invisible, patient, and absolute. That night, in the command tent, the atmosphere was thick with frustration and fear. Lieutenant Mason Walker, the team leader, leaned over the operations map. His face, rugged and sunburnt, was lit only by the dull glow of the laptop screen. The map was dotted with red marks, every one representing a fallen soldier. He clenched his jaw. "They're playing with us," he muttered. "They're not just killing. They're sending a message." Across from him, Sergeant Davis threw down his helmet. "We've been here 6 weeks and still can't find them. We've lost more men to 3 snipers than to entire platoons. Who are these ghosts?" Before Mason could reply, the tent flap opened. A communications officer stepped in, headset pressed to his ear. "Lieutenant," he said, "Command just authorized external support." Mason frowned. "External? From where?" "Delta Force," the officer replied. "They're sending a specialist. 8A-0800 tomorrow." The room went quiet. Delta Force rarely got involved in standard sniper operations unless things were dire. Mason exchanged glances with his team. Curiosity, skepticism, and a glimmer of hope flickered among them. "Who is it?" he asked finally. The officer hesitated. "Staff Sergeant Elena Ramirez." That name drew a few raised eyebrows. Ramirez was not a name anyone in the SEALs recognized. "Never heard of him," Davis muttered. The officer corrected softly. "Not him, her." The tent fell silent again. A woman sniper. That alone stirred disbelief. The SEALs had fought alongside women before, medics, analysts, even intelligence officers. But a lone female sniper from Delta Force was unheard of. Mason's brows furrowed. "She's coming here? Alone?" "Yes, sir," the officer said. "She's requested full tactical access, drone footage, and previous engagement logs. Command says she's handled situations like this before." Davis scoffed. "Handled? Nobody's handled these guys." Mason didn't respond. He stared at the map one last time before stepping outside. The cold air hit him hard. Above the mountains, the horizon was just starting to pale, the first hint of morning light creeping through. He didn't know what to expect, but deep down, he felt something shift. Maybe Command was desperate. Maybe they were throwing in someone crazy enough to go alone against 3 ghosts. Either way, tomorrow was going to change everything. The next morning, the rhythmic hum of a Black Hawk helicopter echoed through the valley. Dust and sand spiraled into the air as it landed at the edge of the base. The SEALs gathered, watching as the side door slid open. Out stepped Staff Sergeant Elena Ramirez. She wasn't what they expected. She was tall but lean, with sharp eyes that scanned the horizon before she even greeted anyone. Her hair was tied back, tucked under her cap. She carried only 2 duffel bags, one for her gear, one for her rifle. Her uniform was clean, minimal, no unnecessary patches or ornaments. She walked straight toward the command tent, ignoring the curious stares around her. Mason met her halfway. "Sergeant Ramirez?" She saluted crisply. "Yes, sir." "Elena Ramirez. Call sign Shadow. Delta Force Sniper, 3rd Division." Her voice was calm, low, controlled. There was no arrogance in it, just quiet certainty. Mason extended his hand. "Lieutenant Mason Walker. Appreciate the help." She shook his hand firmly, then glanced at the ridgeline in the distance. "I read your reports. 3-man sniper team. Highly mobile. Rotating positions after every engagement?" Mason nodded. "Yeah, every time we think we've got them, they're gone." She tilted her head slightly. "They're not ghosts," she said. "They're hunters. Hunters can be hunted." The words hung in the air, cutting through the morning wind. A few SEALs exchanged doubtful glances. Davis muttered under his breath, "We'll see." Elena ignored him. She opened her duffel bag and began assembling her rifle, piece by piece, like a craftsman restoring an instrument. It was a custom-built M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, matte black, modified stock, extended barrel, and a specialized suppressor. Every motion was precise. When she loaded the final round into the magazine, the metallic click echoed with finality. Mason couldn't help but ask, "What makes you so sure you can find them?" She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Because they think no one's good enough to. That's their mistake." By evening, Elena had already analyzed every combat log, every GPS trail, every thermal image. She worked in silence, her focus absolute. She barely ate, barely rested. On the wall behind her, she had pinned a large map of the valley. Red lines connected attack points. Circles marked vantage ridges. To others, it was chaos. To her, it was a pattern. When Mason entered the tent that night, she didn't look up. "They're working in triangles," she said. "One sniper covers. One fires. One repositions. That's why you can't track them. They're rotating fire points in less than 90 seconds. Mason stared at the map. "So how do we stop them?" She finally turned. "We make them stay still." He frowned. "And how do we do that?" Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "By making them think they're hunting us." Later that night, as darkness swallowed the valley again, the SEALs gathered around their campfire. No one spoke loudly. Some cleaned their weapons. Others just stared at the horizon. Somewhere out there, 3 unseen snipers were watching the same stars, waiting for another chance to strike. Davis shook his head. A woman sniper taking on the ghost team. Sounds like suicide. Mason didn't answer. He was watching the command tower, where Elena stood alone, silhouetted against the floodlight. Her eyes were fixed on the mountains, unmoving, calculating. She looked less like a soldier and more like part of the night itself. He finally said, almost to himself, "Maybe suicide's exactly what it takes to stop ghosts." By midnight, Elena was still awake, fine-tuning her rifle 0 under starlight. She checked wind speeds, humidity, elevation. Everything had to be perfect. Each adjustment was deliberate, almost reverent. When she finished, she looked toward the ridge where 3 red dots on her map glowed faintly, the last known sniper positions. She whispered softly, "Tomorrow, I start hunting." The wind shifted, carrying her voice into the darkness. Somewhere beyond those mountains, the enemy sniper team might have felt a chill they couldn't explain, as if something had started watching them back. The next morning broke slow and pale, the Afghan sky bruised purple over the ridges. The camp stirred awake, boots scuffing gravel, engines humming, coffee brewing weakly in tin cups. But amid the noise, one person moved with quiet precision, like a ghost among men. Staff Sergeant Elena Ramirez, known by her Delta call sign Shadow, was already outside the perimeter, her scope pointed toward the sunrise. She'd been awake since before dawn, eyes scanning the mountain lines, learning the rhythm of the land, how the light shifted on the rocks, where heat shimmered, how sound carried through the valley. To her, war wasn't just about the enemy. It was about listening to the silence between every bullet. From the base tower, Lieutenant Mason Walker watched her through binoculars. She was a strange sight, alone still, absolutely focused. Most new arrivals fumbled with terrain or needed an escort. She didn't. She'd studied it overnight, memorized every contour like it was a page in a familiar book. Mason lowered the binoculars, half impressed, half uneasy. He turned to Sergeant Davis beside him. She's been there since 4. Doesn't even blink. Davis sipped his coffee, skeptical. Yeah, well, let's see how long that calm lasts when the ghost team fires back. A woman sniper in these hills? She won't last 5 minutes. Mason didn't reply. He'd seen arrogance kill men faster than bullets. At 0900 hours, the team assembled in the strategy tent. The air was thick with tension and dust. Elena stood at the table, her rifle case beside her, her face unreadable. On the map were red circles, the last 6 sniper incidents. Every attack, she began, her tone measured, happened along this ridgeline. Same pattern, high elevation, west wind, limited moonlight. They're not random hits. They're choosing conditions. A SEAL named Ortiz frowned. Choosing? Like they're waiting for us? Elena nodded. Yes, they're orchestrating it. They fire from 3 coordinated points. 1 shoots, 1 spots, 1 repositions. Triangular formation. They overlap their fields of fire. That's why you can't trace them. She looked around the table. But I can. There was a brief silence. Then Davis chuckled. You think you're better than every sniper who's tried? Elena didn't blink. No, she said simply. Just quieter. The room stilled again. Mason suppressed a smirk. He didn't know if it was confidence or something else, but whatever it was, it demanded attention. She tapped the map again. They'll strike again soon. They have a rhythm, 5 to 7 days between kills. Tonight's the 5th. My guess, they're already moving. Mason leaned forward. So what do you need? Silence, she said. And 1 drone, nothing armed. Just eyes, back up? She shook her head. Not yet. If they sense a team, they'll vanish. I'll find their ghost trail first. Davis muttered under his breath, or become part of it. Mason shot him a warning look. That's enough. Elena simply closed her laptop, picked up her rifle case, and said, You'll have answers by nightfall. By noon, the desert sun burned white. Elena sat under the camouflage netting of a small outpost overlooking the valley. Her gear was stripped down, only essentials, rifle, scope, water, notebook, and her father's old compass. As she watched the distant hills through her lens, her mind drifted, not in distraction, but in memory. She could still see her father's hands, rough from years in the Marines, teaching her how to steady a rifle back in El Paso. Don't fight the gun, he told her. Let it breathe with you. It's not a weapon. It's a conversation between you and the wind. He'd taken her to abandoned ranches, let her shoot tin cans from hundreds of yards away. She was 12 when she first hit one dead center. He'd laughed, that big, proud laugh, and said, "You see, Mia? Stillness wins." But years later, after his service ended, that same man lost his war at home, the one no one saw. PTSD, sleepless nights, guilt. Elena remembered finding his old sniper patch in a box one morning, folded next to a note that said, "Fight the silence I couldn't." That was the day she joined the army. Now, sitting miles from anywhere familiar, she whispered to the wind, "Still fighting it, Dad." Hours passed. The sky shifted from blue to gold. Dust swirled through the low valley, and distant gunfire echoed faintly. Another patrol, another engagement. But Elena's world was narrowed to her scope. Then, at exactly 1742 hours, she caught something. A brief flash. Barely a glint. Metal on rock far across the ridge. It was too deliberate, too sharp to be random sunlight. Her pulse steadied. She marked the coordinates. "Got you," she whispered. She radioed Mason. "This is Shadow. Possible sighting. Northridge, grid 782. Static crackled. Copy that, Shadow? Need confirmation before we engage." "Negative," she replied. "They're watching. If I call backup, they'll scatter. I'll shadow them till nightfall." Mason's voice tightened. "Shadow, that's not procedure." She cut the line. This wasn't about procedure. This was about understanding the predator before she killed it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she followed their traces, faint footprints, disturbed gravel, the subtle drag of a rifle bipod across sand. Every step was calculated. Her breathing sensed with the desert, slow, invisible. Through her night scope, she finally saw them. 3 figures moving like phantoms, silhouettes against the darkening ridge. One unpacked gear. One scouted. One covered the rear. They were disciplined, smooth, lethal. She watched for hours, memorizing every gesture. They never spoke aloud, only hand signals and subtle nods. It was artistry, in a brutal way. At one point, the lead sniper, tall, broad-shouldered, paused and looked straight toward her direction. Her muscles tensed. Had he seen her? No. His gaze passed over, scanning for movement, unaware of the invisible eyes watching him. Elena smiled faintly. "So you're the hawk." She didn't fire. Not yet. Tonight wasn't the night to kill. It was the night to learn. She waited until they packed up again, retreating toward the northern cliffs. That was their pattern. Attack, vanish, reposition. But this time, she had their path. She marked it on her wrist GPS, each coordinate glowing red. By the time she returned to base, the moon hung low and pale. Inside the command tent, Mason looked up as she entered. "Where the hell were you?" "Learning," she said, unstrapping her rifle. She spread her map across the table. 3 new red lines intersecting near a cliff marked Carr's Ridge. "They'll strike from here next," she said confidently. High elevation, 700-yard field of vision, westward wind. Ideal sniper nest. Mason stared at the data. "You're sure?" She met his eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything." Davis scoffed. "You mean to tell me you crawled around out there alone, just to guess where they might be?" She looked at him, calm as ice. "Not guess, no." He shook his head. "You're insane." Elena finally smiled, the first time anyone saw her do it. "Good," she said softly. "Because sane people don't kill ghosts." Mason leaned over the table. "What's your next move?" Her answer was immediate. "I take them out, alone." The room erupted in protest. Davis stood. "No way, we go as a unit." But Mason watched her eyes. There was something there, conviction, not arrogance. She believed this was her fight. And part of him believed it too. He exhaled slowly. You've got one chance, Shadow. One. She nodded. That's all I'll need. Later that night, she sat in her quarters, cleaning her rifle under dim light. Her reflection shimmered in the steel barrel, calm, focused, almost emotionless. She loaded each bullet carefully, whispering to herself. 3 ghosts, 1 bullet each. Outside, the desert winds howled. The ghost team was already preparing for their next kill. But for the first time, someone else was watching them, someone even quieter. And in the stillness of her tent, Elena Ramirez smiled, a hunter ready to meet her prey. Elena woke before the dawn like a metronome set to war. The chill cut through her jacket, but she barely noticed. Her world was a narrow cone of focus, the green reticle in her scope, the whisper of wind over stone, the faint human rhythms that gave away movement long before a body crossed a ridge. For 2 weeks, she had watched, learned, and cataloged the ghost team's behavior. Tonight, everything she needed to act felt close enough to touch. At breakfast, the camp moved in slow, efficient circles, men trading quiet jokes, checking kit, sliding extra rounds into magazines. Outside, the mountains held their breath. Mason found Elena hunched over the map table, a thin bead of coffee cooling untouched by her elbow. Lines and hashes covered the map like a surgeon's notes. Angles of approach, estimated velocities of the prevailing winds, shadows calculated by moon phase. She had scrawled tiny symbols, triangles with arrows, indicating the ghost team's rotation pattern. To her, it wasn't chaos. It was choreography. You slept? Mason asked, leaning over the map. He watched her hands move, tracing the triangular formations she had marked. 2 hours, she said. Enough. Her tone was spare, practiced. They use a 3-point rotation. After a strike, the firing position shifts 30 to 40 meters mostly lateral to their ridgeline. They rely on quick, overlapping arcs of suppression and relocation, so drones or counter-snipers don't get a reading long enough to triangulate them. Mason tapped one of the triangles. You're saying they've been disciplined enough to shift that quickly after every shot? She nodded. Disciplined and predictable. The hawk, their leader, trusts a rhythm. He believes stealth is permanence. That arrogance creates repetition. They always leave a subtle breadcrumb. Bipod scrapes, disturbed shale at the same angle, a faint pattern in the dust. If you know where to look, the ridge speaks. Ortiz, who'd been listening, scoffed. You're reading rock like it's a confession. Sounds like guesswork. It's pattern recognition, Elena said. And history. Men who train together get lazy in the same ways. Small habits get copied, amplified. They're confident in the dark because they have practiced the dark. But confidence leaves prints. Mason watched her for a long moment, the way you study someone you've just admitted you might need. He felt the old, familiar itch, that combination of responsibility and the slight, dangerous hope of redemption if you rolled with the right gamble. All right, he said finally. You've got 2 days to confirm. If you're right, we move. If you're wrong. He didn't finish. Both men knew how wrong could end. She offered nothing but a small, steady look. I won't be wrong. Over the next 48 hours, Elena became a living stain across the valley ridges. She didn't stay in one place. She would climb, observe, crawl back, sleep 2 hours, climb again. She drank less, ate less. Her notebook filled with shorthand, wind comps, minute changes, a star chart she'd drawn to time the angles of moonlight during typical kill windows. Mason pitched in where he could, lending a technician to her forensics. Drone footage, old thermal logs, and a copy of the ghost team's crude radio bursts the SEALs had captured. Elena stitched them together. Like a quilt, one piece at a time they formed a whole. The hawk's signature began to emerge. He favored a left-leaning exposure when the wind was below 10 miles per hour. His spotter would move no further than 20 meters from him, the third man keeping a constantly shifting perimeter. The trio preferred to engage from dusk to 3 hours post-sunset, enough darkness to hide in shadow, but faint moonlight to pick up glints off optics. They preferred places where the echo folded back on itself. A shot gave the illusion of coming from multiple directions. The ghost team had become masters of deception. On the third observation, Elena found a mistake the SEALs had missed entirely. The ghosts' radio discipline, what should have been absolute silence, wasn't perfect. They relied on hand signals, yes, but the hawk's spotter habitually tapped the butt of his rifle against his thigh once when releasing a parabolic metal wedge used to adjust range on his scope. It was a tiny human tick, and it placed a timestamp on their movement. With the range wedge tap and subsequent adjustment, the trio would be in motion for 50 to 70 seconds, precisely the window Elena needed to catch them repositioning. She called Mason that night from an observation blind. They'll reposition at 2016 after the next shot. They do a 3-step shift. The wedge tap gives it away. Mason's voice over the cone was low and flat. You sure enough to stake men on that timing? Not stake, she corrected. Intercept. I'm not asking for the unit to commit. Mason hesitated, then barked, You want a single Overwatch team to stand by on my mark. If anything goes sideways, you call and we smoke them out. Understood, she said. She felt, for the first time in weeks, a small thrill, not from violence, but from the clarity of purpose. The hunt had rules. She knew them. Night fell like an anvil. The valley cooled. Elena crawled into position 1/2 mile from Carr's Ridge, beneath a scrim of rock and tall scrub. The rifle beside her was more an extension of bone than tool. She had measured every vibration of the stock against her heartbeat. Wind hissed at precisely 7 miles per hour when she checked, favorable for her zeroing calculations. The moon was a thin coin. Hours dripped by. She watched as 3 small silhouettes assembled across from her, moving with the economy of practiced killers. The spotter, a quiet man, adjusted lenses, tapping his rifle butt against his thigh once. Her breath slowed. The hawk took a shallow breath and settled into position. The first shot came, a crisp report that folded into the night and was followed by the sigh of the valley. A body dropped. The 2 remaining figures rotated, executing the triangle of labor they'd trained into muscle memory. For 57 seconds, the world was a metronome. Then, true to form, the spotter was again halfway into his adjustment. Elena corrected for drift, compensated for minute elevation shifts from the changing heat, and crawled 5 meters left to a new patch of shadow to keep her angle different. Her heart hammered, but her hand was untroubled. Where others saw bullets and death, she saw calculations and opportunity. They moved. She saw the scrape on the shale, the biting leave of a boot print at an angle that matched her triangular map. It was small, useless detail to anyone else, but not to her. She took a breath and marked their new coordinates. She didn't fire. Not yet. For now, she would be the eye, the quiet statistic in a ledger that recorded the end of the ghosts. When she returned that night to the command tent and spread the coordinates on the map, Mason nodded slowly. The triangles she had traced over the red marks aligned with painful, embarrassing neatness. Carr's Ridge, he said. You've put them on rails. Elena's eyes did not leave the map. They're riding a rhythm, and rhythms get boring. When you know the beat, you can put a foot in front of it. Davis, who had been sullenly respectful since seeing Elena in the field, stood and offered the smallest of grins. Okay, Shadow. You get us the time. We'll get you the night. She met his look without flinching. No, she said. You won't be there to shoot. You'll be there to hold the lines. I'm going to give them a reason to stay put long enough to see me. Alone? Ortiz asked, incredulous. Yes, Elena said. I'll be the needle. You'll be the thread. Silence fell, not the heavy silence of fear, but the taut kind that signals readiness. Mason folded his arms against the map and looked up. You've got one more day to refine your plan. If any of this goes sideways, we'll pull you out. But if you're right, and I believe you are, we end this ghost show. She packed her bag wordlessly and walked toward the low moon. On the ridge above, the ghost team obliviously sharpened their routine, unaware that a woman with a notebook and a father's lessons had already read the script for their demise. Elena braved in the dry night air and felt the old quiet in her bones, that cold, absolute calm which arrives only when a hunter is fully prepared to be the hunted no longer. Tomorrow, she decided, would be the day the ghost team learned that patterns can be broken, and that predators who trusted permanence could be taught a new lesson. Stillness could be a trap. Night folded over Carr's Ridge like a curtain. The moon was a thin crescent, shy and unreliable. The stars offered no promises. Elena moved the way shadows move when they want to be mistaken for nothing. Deliberate, slow, impossible to hear. Her boots found crevices by feel. Her pack rode light against her spine. She had stripped everything unnecessary until the rifle became the center of her world. She had planned this crawl for days. The angles, the wind windows, a time between the ghost team's shots and their reposition. She had rehearsed every breathe hold, every micro-adjustment to her bipod, the precise way to press her cheek to the stock so the rifle would settle like a thought. Tonight wasn't improvisation. It was choreography, and she had already taught herself every step. Mason's Overwatch team lay 300 meters to her rear on a parallel ridge, their infrared optics sweeping her sector. They were a silent insurance policy, a ring of men ready to pour fire if the situation collapsed. They did not know the small mercies Elena afforded herself. A thumb pressed to her lips when fear tried to rise. The soft, private prayer she mouthed to a father who had taught her to breathe slow. She was alone because the ghosts had to believe they were alone. Their arrogance depended on the illusion of vacancy. At 2106, she found her position, a shallow depression behind a slab of shale, whose jagged edge masked her silhouette from the primary sight lines of the fingers of ridge above. She set the rifle on the bipod with a mechanic's care and peered through the scope. The valley unfurled below like a dark ocean. Far across, the ghost team's most recent nest glittered faintly. A small scatter of tarps, a stub of rock they used for support, the dull twinkle of optics in the low light. Elena checked her wind flag. A scrap of black cloth nodded to a twig 30 yards ahead and adjusted her turret. Wind danced in the valley at 7 miles per hour, gusting from the west, but local eddies shifted unpredictably between the ridges. She logged the numbers into the scope's reticle and into the soft, practiced archive of her mind. Distance, 924 yards. Temperature, humidity, barometric pressure. Each a quiet conspirator in the life and death of a bullet. She unshouldered the rifle and closed her eyes for a heartbeat. Memory came in a flash. Her father at a makeshift firing line, teaching her to feel the barrel's heartbeat, telling her that bullets were only promises until you respected the wind. She felt the old lesson anchor her hands. Then she exhaled, opened her eyes, and began to watch. Across the way, the three figures moved with the same smooth fatalism she'd seen before. The spotter, lithe and precise, crouched to sweep the valley. The second man slung a bipod and eased his weapon into place. The hawk stood a little taller, shoulders squared, like a man claiming dominion over the dark. They did not speak much, Their communication was in glances, in tiny, efficient gestures, the language of professionals. At 21:12, Mason's voice crackled low in her ear. "Shadow, we're in position. You're green. Maintain radio silence unless you need extraction." Elena kept her gaze in the scope and whispered, "Copy. Eyes on all three. They're on their timer." She watched the spotter adjust his rangefinder, heard the faint, metallic tap she had learned to recognize, the wedge against the rifle butt, and felt the tiny prickle of triumph that comes when theory meets flesh. 57 seconds, she'd said. 57 seconds to catch them in motion, to predict their shuffle and intercept their rhythm. The first shot tore the night, a controlled report that folded into a canyon of stone. A body shuddered and fell where the ghosts had chosen to strike. The two remaining men moved like trained clockwork. One stayed to watch, the other began the lateral shift. The dust rose in a hush of disturbed shale. Elena's pulse slowed again. Her hands were machines. She did not shoot. She let the moment breathe. The ghosts' very success created their danger. A small window of motion where they were vulnerable. She eased the rifle's weight, checking the leveled reticle against a backdrop of rock. The hawk barked a single-hand signal. The second man moved, and his boot crushed a certain stone at a specific angle, a breadcrumb Elena had been tracking. The dust trail revealed the line they would take. Elena crawled 5 feet to her left, careful to keep her silhouette behind a low scrub. The scrape of her sleeve was a thought. She repositioned the bipod, re-leveled and resettled. Mason's voice was barely a breath in her ear. "Shade, you're stable. Wait for my mark if you need extraction. You have 10 minutes until the thick of night." 10 minutes. She had planned for more than a few heartbeats worth. She had planned, instead, for rhythm, for the 8 count she intended to make history. The ghost team's movements would be predictable for long enough to catch them exposed. The hawk believed in his technique. Arrogance, Elena thought, was the one thing training couldn't erase. It made soldiers repeat their bad habits. The second man shifted into place. The hawk, exposed for a moment, swept his optic across a new corridor, looking for anything he hadn't expected. Elena watched his chest rise. She watched his finger brush the trigger. Time lanced forward as if someone had pulled the world taut. Then a tracer of movement, a flash of reflective glass on a distant ridge, revealed the hawk repositioning to gain a new angle. He moved into a sliver of light that painted his cheekbone. For less than a second, his profile was perfectly framed. Elena's breath matched the landscape. Slow in, slow out. Her index finger caressed the trigger and held. She'd been taught to wait for a shot that left no moral residue, the kind that ends a fight, cleanly because everything else had failed. A single rifle report echoed. Not hers. The hawk's shot clipped rock where she'd been 10 heartbeats earlier. It was searching, angry, imprecise. He'd assumed the wind. He'd assumed the same choices. He had not assumed her. She felt the gravity of the moment. If she fired now, the world would reorder. 3 lives would end. 3 families would hang on the news. The valley would change forever. But hesitance kills soldiers just as surely as a cold scope. A sniper is a judge and an executioner. She had to be both, and also precise. Her finger tightened. She exhaled like a sigh and let the rifle speak. The shot was almost gentle against the way the night had screamed before. The bullet left with a whisper of resolve and met its mark with absolute clarity. The hawk's rifle slipped from slack fingers. He collapsed like a cut tree. For a brutal second the remaining man froze, lips a thin line, and then he turned toward the rock where his leader had been. Elena's second shot found him as he fumbled for cover. His world ended in the dark's embrace. Time fractured in small ways afterward. the crackle of radios erupting down the line, Mason's voice finally tearing into her ear. Report? Status? The valley seemed to exhale. Her watch read 8 minutes and 7 seconds from first ghost shot to last. 8 minutes. She felt neither triumph nor victory then, only the weight of decisions executed correctly. She packed with the same ritual care she had used to assemble the weapon. The rifle slid into its case like a second skin. Her back was cold with sweat. Adrenaline hummed through her veins. Mason met her as she crawled back into the relative safety of his line. You good? He asked, breath ragged. She let out a laugh that sounded both tired and empty. I'm fine. They're not. They moved back toward the base as the first weak light of dawn crept over Carr's Ridge. The world was quieter in a different way now, not the heavy, anxious silence of waiting, but the stunned hush of something concluded. Alana's boots left fresh prints in the gravel, simple, human, utterly ordinary. For the first time since she'd arrived at Lion's Gate, the valley felt less haunted. Behind them, the wind toyed with an abandoned piece of cloth that had once been a signal flag. It fluttered against a rock, then settled. Shadows retreated. The hunt was over, at least for now. By the time Mason's men reached Elena, the ridgeline smelled of cold metal and dust, the kind of metallic tang that hangs after close gunfire. The moon had thinned. Dawn was a rumor on the horizon. Figures moved in the blue light seals, with faces set like chisels, rifles cradled, but eyes searching for signs of a threat that had been vanquished. Elena lay on her stomach, breathing slow, the rifle resting in its case beside her like a sleeping animal. Her palms were steady, but the back of her neck prickled with an awareness that came after any kill. A curious, hollowed quiet as if the world had rearranged itself where it mattered most. Mason knelt beside her, flashlight carving a thin white through the dim. Status, he demanded, voice rough with adrenaline. She closed the scope cap and exhaled. 3K all immediate. 1 at 21:12, 2 at 21:18 and 21:19. No friendly fire. No engagement on our side. Her words were economical, delivered like facts in a ledger. Yet beneath the matter-of-fact tone, there was something else. A small tremor of distance, as if she were describing a landscape rather than 3 human bodies. The SEALs moved to secure the scene. Radios buzzed and piped static. Thermal imagers swept, confirming silence. A medic ran a quick check, no sign of life. The hawk lay where Elena's shot had planted him, his body folded against a jagged rock, eyes still toward the valley, as if he had not yet decided to stop watching. A second man had crumpled mid-step, radio slack in his grip. The third, the spotter, had slumped to the side, a thin stream of blood dark against his sleeve. Silence reasserted itself, but it was the kind that thrummed underfoot heavy with consequence. The SEALs had been haunted for weeks by these men. Now they were ordinary corpses. The transformation was jarring and almost obscene in its banality. Davis crouched, running gloved fingers over the hawk's kit, lips tight. Look at this. He tapped a small weathered patch sewn inside the man's vest. No insignia. Professional rigging. Look at the soldering on the scope mount piece of work. He met Elena's eyes with a begrudging respect. These weren't amateurs. Elena didn't look up from where she sat, cleaning a speck of grit from the case hinge. They never were. They sifted through the gear with surgical care. Emails and messages couldn't know the names. But a live feed would want evidence, and evidence would want to be orderly. In one of the pockets, they found a folded slip of paper with Cyrillic marks and a smear of grease. In another, a cheap religious icon wrapped around a compass. Small things, but they told stories. Training had been professional, possibly outsourced, old-school bolt-action prudence mixed with modern optics. The Hawk's plates revealed deliberate bulletproofing, a criminal's thrift paired with a soldier's precision. Whoever had trained him had taught him to move like a ghost and to leave no visible trail except for habits. Habits were human. They didn't survive being trained into machines. Mason radioed the command at Lion's Gate. LZ secure. 3 hostiles neutralized. Request immediate retrieval and forensics team. His voice steadied into rigid protocol, but when he looked at Elena, the rigidity softened. You call that 1 shot each? She swallowed. 1 shot did the dirty work. 2 shots finished the job. The first hawk gave me a profile. The second was opportunistic. The teen's timing left them exposed. You never forget the little things. She met Mason's gaze, and for a breath there was an unspoken exchange. He had sent his men, but she had made the decision. They had trusted an outsider, and she had repaid that trust in absolutes. The forensics team arrived at first light in armored trucks, methodically taking photographs, bagging materials, tagging the positions of spent casings and optical fragments. They moved with the bureaucratic grace of people who had to make stories legible for others, those who signed papers and filed reports in faraway rooms with fluorescent lights. Elena watched, hands open and empty, as technicians unfolded the ghost teen's world into evidence boxes and catalogs. Her rifle was fingerprinted, examined, photographed. They called in intelligence. They would run the Cyrillic slip and any serial numbers they could lift. The base commander, a rigid man with a face like a knuckled fist, pressed his hand to Mason's shoulder. Good work, he said. You saved lives tonight. There were interviews, and Elena answered like a machine tasked with giving testimony. She described trajectories, time-stamped positions, her own silence and movements. She explained why she had refused backup, why she'd chosen the slots she did. Mason sat in the corner, watching, and at some point, the other SEALs began to cluster not to question, but to understand. Davis, who'd been the loudest skeptic before, now asked about her zeroing technique, like an apprentice who had found an unexpectedly good mentor. Word spread quickly through the base, and with word came a new sound, respect. It began as a low hum, and built into something that could not be muffled. The men who had traded jokes less than a day earlier now stopped mid-sentence when Elena passed. They swapped stories in small groups, comparing their impressions, reciting the way the ghost team had moved, and how one woman had punctured that movement with 3 bullets. The myth that had grown like mold in the dark, the ghost team was being excised by a single human decision, and men who'd whispered in fear now lowered their voices in reverence. But not everything that followed fit neatly into a metal case. Back at the operations tent, the commander called Elena in. He was not unkind, but he was very formal. Staff Sergeant Ramirez, he said, adhering to rank and separation. You'll be debriefed, and your engagement will be classified. There will be commendations, but some from higher up will decide what that looks like. For now, stay tight and be ready for transport. Her face stayed blank. Sir. She left the tent and sat on a low crate outside, watching the ridge where the ghost team had been. The sunrise painted the rocks gold and made the place almost beautiful. The beauty and the death sat side by side, like 2 stubborn truths. Mason joined her a moment later, cup of coffee in hand. He settled beside her, hands wrapped around the steaming metal, and neither spoke for a long minute. You ever get used to it? He asked finally. Elena looked at him. No, she said. You learn to carry it differently. She tightened her fist around the coffee cup until the rim bent into her palm. People will make legends out of this. That's fine, but I keep 3 marks in mind. She tapped the crate one for each life that had ended. Names aren't mine to speak. They were alive once. That stays with you. Mason's voice dropped. We lost good men before you came. This helps start to make that even. You did what no one thought could be done. She looked at him, and saw in his eyes the rawness of someone who'd almost given up hope. "Don't make me the end of the story," she said. "Make me a line in it. Don't forget the others." He nodded. "We won't." When the first condolence messages were sent to higher commands, and when the base quieted to its day jobs of watching and patrolling, Elena walked to the ridge alone. The 3 bodies had been recovered and sent away at last, but the stone where they'd fired from still bore the ghosts of their passage-scuffed shale, a patch of trampled grass, the faint imprint of a worn boot. She crouched and pressed her fingers to the earth, feeling the compacted dust, the slow exhale of the mountain. There was grief in the act, but also a small, precise closure. She closed her eyes and murmured a name she never said aloud, a memory of a man who had taught her to breathe with the barrel. She stamped 3 small marks in the dirt, one for each enemy, not as triumph, but as acknowledgement. Killing was not victory. It was the end of a mandate. The mountain would forget them in a season or 2, but for now, their absence hummed like a new chord in the valley. Back at camp, the rumor mill had already begun shaping the night into legend. Some would write that a single shot ended an unstoppable team. Others would exaggerate, invent, and claim things for loudness' sake. Elena did not care for stories. She cared for facts, for trajectories, for the tiny mathematics of wind and bullet and time. But as the sun rose higher, and the base returned to its orbit of small tasks and big responsibilities, a new thing had been created among the men and women in that desert, a measure of hope. The ghost team had been unstoppable only until someone read their rhythm and refused to dance to it. Elena finished her coffee, shouldered her pack, and walked toward the command tent. There would be paperwork. There would be a certificate in some file, and perhaps later, a medal. For now, there was still ground to watch, and the belief that the next hunt might not be hers alone. For 3 days after the operation, Carr's Ridge remained still. The wind brushed the broken shale, carrying away the scent of gunpowder and the whispers of what had happened there. The base called it secured territory now, but to Elena, it felt more like a grave that refused to speak. She spent those 3 days in silence. No rifle, no scope, no briefing. Just a quiet cot, a lukewarm cup of coffee, and her thoughts that looped endlessly like film reels in her head. The ghost team's deaths had ended a nightmare for the SEALs, yet something in her refused to rest. She wasn't haunted by guilt. She'd long accepted the moral fracture of her work, but by the echo. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the hollow space left behind by the men she'd outthought and outshot. When Mason entered the tent on the 3rd evening, she didn't rise. He stopped just inside the flap, studying her face in the half-light. She looked calm, too calm, like someone holding herself in a fragile balance. "You've barely eaten," he said quietly. "They're worried you'll vanish if they blink." Elena's lips curved faintly. "You can't vanish when you were never really here." Mason sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "You did good work, Ramirez. The command's calling. It's one of the most successful solo counter-sniper operations in recent history. There'll be a debrief in D.C. next month. Commendations, maybe a reassignment if you want it." "Reassignment," she repeated softly, the word foreign in her mouth. "What would I do? Teach other people how to end rhythms?" He pulled up a chair, sitting opposite her. "You could teach them how to survive. There's a difference." She met his eyes finally. "Survival isn't the same thing as living, Captain." The silence between them was not hostile. It was heavy, filled with things they both knew and chose not to say. That night, a storm rolled in from the west. Desert storms were strange creatures, sudden, electric, violent, and gone just as quickly. Elena stood outside her tent and watched the lightning ripple across the clouds, striking somewhere beyond the ridge where the ghosts had fallen. The air smelled like iron and rain. Ortiz passed by with his poncho half draped, offering her a grin. You watching for ghosts? Always, she said simply. He hesitated, then added, You know, most of us didn't believe anyone could do what you did. But seeing you work it wasn't luck. You made them predictable. That's different. Elena didn't answer. Ortiz shifted awkwardly, then walked on, leaving her alone under the sky. Lightning flashed again. In that brief white explosion, she saw everything as it had been, the ridge, the bodies, the glint of metal in the dirt. It wasn't memory. It was replay. When the thunder faded, she whispered, 8 minutes to the storm, as if reminding the night of a secret. The next morning, a helicopter thundered overhead orders from command. Mason assembled the unit, crisp and exact, while a few new officers arrived carrying files and equipment. The ghost teen's belongings had been analyzed. Intel confirmed what Elena had suspected. Ex-military contractors turned mercenaries, hired by an unknown source to destabilize U.S. operations in the sector. Their precision had come from formal training, their freedom from the absence of conscience. One of the new officers, a tall man in a suit that looked wrong in the desert, approached Elena. His name tag read Klein Intel Ops. He studied her like a specimen. Sergeant Ramirez, he said, you performed above expectation. I'm told you predicted their movements almost mathematically. She shrugged. Patterns are math. People make math predictable. Klein smiled faintly, but his eyes were sharp. We're setting up a new threat interdiction program stateside. Behavioral predictive modeling, sniper counterdynamics. You'd be valuable there. I'm not a scientist, she said flatly. No, he agreed. You're better. You feel equations. She didn't reply. Mason watched from a few steps away, already suspicious of Klein's polished tone. After Klein left, Mason asked quietly, You thinking about it? Maybe, she said. But you don't put ghosts in classrooms. They haunt better in silence. That evening, she found herself drawn back to the ridge again, alone. The world was soft with twilight, the mountains bathed in gold and violet. The storm had washed everything clean, the tracks, the shell casings, even the faint blood that had marked the stones. Only 3 small depressions remained where bodies had lain. She knelt, tracing one with her fingertips. The air was still, thick with memory. She thought of the hawk, his precision, his arrogance, his silence, and wondered who had first taught him to shoot. Somewhere, maybe, there had been a teacher like her father. Someone who'd said, breathe with the wind. She whispered into the empty air, I don't hate you. It wasn't forgiveness, not really. It was acknowledgement. In that whisper lived something purer, a sniper's strange kind of prayer, respect for the dead, and a promise to remember them as more than targets. The sun dipped and shadows stretched. Behind her, she heard soft footsteps Mason again. He didn't speak until he was close enough to see her eyes. You ever think you'll stop coming up here? He asked. She smiled faintly. Do you ever stop visiting graves? He nodded, understanding. Command's wrapping us up. We ship out tomorrow. You'll have to decide stay with us or take Klein's offer. She rose slowly, dusting her knees. Tell him I'll think about it. Maybe it's time to fight differently. Mason tilted his head. Differently how? Elena's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the sun melted into the mountains. Not through sights. Through minds. Maybe it's time I teach them how to see patterns before they become deaths. He smiled. You'd make a hell of an instructor. Or a terrible one, she said. Depends who's learning. Later that night, the base held an informal gathering, part celebration, part farewell. Someone played an old guitar. Others shared rations like feast food. Davis approached Elena with 2 tin cups of whiskey. You ever get tired of people staring at you like you're a myth? He asked. I'm not a myth, she replied. I'm just noise that got lucky. He chuckled. You're worse than a ghost. You're humble. They drank in silence, the warmth of the whiskey fighting the desert chill. For once, the laughter around them felt genuine. The weight in the air had lifted. Men who once flinched at shadows now laughed without checking their flanks. Before she left the circle, Mason raised his cup. To the ghost hunter, he said. And to 8 minutes that changed everything. The men echoed the toast, voices low and reverent. Elena inclined her head, accepting, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. When the laughter faded and night reclaimed the camp, she walked to her tent and sat on her cot, opening her field journal. The pages were filled with numbers-wind angles, timestamps, firing data. On the last page, she wrote one line in neat, measured handwriting. You don't kill to win. You kill to end killing. She closed the book and set it beside her rifle case. Outside, the desert breathed quietly. Somewhere in that stillness, she thought she heard the faintest whisper of voice, or maybe just the wind saying, You broke the pattern. She smiled. For the first time in years, she believed it. The next morning, Elena boarded the helicopter bound for the airbase. The propellers roared, the desert shrank below her, and Carr's Ridge became a shadow fading into memory. Mason gave her a nod through the dust cloud, a silent goodbye between soldiers who had shared the same ghosts. As the aircraft lifted higher, Elena stared out the window, watching the ground where she'd made her stand grow smaller and smaller until it looked like nothing more than a wrinkle in the earth. 8 minutes, she whispered to herself again, not as a boast, but as a benediction. Somewhere beyond the clouds, a new life waited. One without scopes or targets, perhaps one where her lessons would prevent another ghost from ever being born. And for the first time since she'd picked up a rifle, Elena Ramirez allowed herself a rare, fragile thought. Maybe she could finally stop listening for the echo of silence. Elena stepped off the C-17 at Andrews Air Force Base, the roar of engines shaking the ground beneath her boots. The air smelled of jet fuel and ozone, a harsh reminder that she had returned to the world of bureaucracy and bright uniforms. Carr's Ridge was now a memory folded into her mind, a place where she had ended 3 lives in 8 minutes and carried the echo of those moments like a faint hum beneath her ribs. Mason had accompanied her only this far, making sure she touched the ground safely. He clasped her shoulder firmly before she was swept away by the hubbub of logistics officers, intelligence liaisons, and personnel specialists. Welcome back, he said. Now the ghosts will be paperwork, not rifles. Elena offered a small nod. If paperwork can haunt the way shadows do, I'll manage. Her first weeks at the new intelligence operations facility were a strange combination of relief and frustration. She was no longer in the field. Her rifle rested in a case in a corner office, dusted and catalogued, but unused. Every day she entered this sterile, humming building, greeted officers in starched uniforms, and analyzed digital traces, tactical simulations, and movement patterns of threats she would never meet face to face. The work was satisfying in a cerebral way, but it lacked the tangible rhythm of a target, a heartbeat, a moment where she could feel the wind and see the pattern bend under her choices. The Ghost team had ended their chapter. Now, hundreds of other conflicts lay in digital shadows. Her first assignment was to work with Klein and his team on a behavioral predictive modeling program. Klein, who had first approached her in the desert, had been promoted within the operations network, and now his office was a glass cube overlooking a chaotic floor of analysts. Ramirez, he said, motioning her inside. We have data from recent conflicts in multiple theaters. Your task is simple. Detect patterns before they result in deaths. Use what you've learned. Patterns, she repeated. It was almost a laugh. You're asking me to hunt ghosts in Excel spreadsheets and satellite feeds. Klein tilted his head. Exactly. Think of it as predictive sniping. Only the bullets are intelligence, and the targets are movement, behavior, and timing. Elena nodded slowly, already imagining trajectories and rhythms. Human behavior was predictable if you watched carefully. She had done it in the mountains with live rifles. Now she would do it with charts, feeds, and simulations. The first simulation was brutal. They fed her the coordinates of a terrorist cell, operating in a foreign city. Using limited intelligence, she plotted potential locations based on movement patterns, response times, and behavior from previous encounters. Within hours, her predictions highlighted 3 likely nests where operatives would be at given times. Analysts ran the drone surveillance feed, and her predictions were nearly perfect. Klein leaned back, impressed. See, you've got a gift. And unlike a sniper on a ridge, you're saving lives without firing a shot. Elena stared at the screens. Saving lives was different, but not easier. Watching digital shadows fall felt hollow. There was no recoil, no calculated breath, no mark to count. Yet the principle remained. Find patterns, interrupt rhythm, and prevent death. Weeks passed. Elena's reputation grew inside the program. Analysts and young officers began calling her Shadow, a nod to her fieldwork. She led seminars on behavioral prediction, movement analysis, and predictive counter-sniping techniques. Her students were civilians and ex-military alike, intelligent, disciplined, yet untested in the high-pressure chaos of a live battlefield. Some of them struggled. "You make it sound so easy," a young officer said during one session. "But how do you really know what someone will do?" Elena looked at him, eyes sharp. "You don't know. You calculate probability, observe deviations, and exploit mistakes. Human beings are creatures of habit. We're lazy in ways that will kill us if we're careless. That's the truth of the battlefield." Her students nodded, but she saw the panic lurking beneath their eyes. She smiled faintly. Fear isn't weakness. Misreading patterns is. Months passed, and the work became routine in its own terrifying way. Elena's mind remained attuned to patterns, to movement, to the invisible rhythms of people and objects. One evening, while analyzing satellite data from a known cartel territory, she noticed something unusual: a sniper cell using tactics strikingly similar to the Ghost team. Her pulse quickened. It was as if a shadow of the past had returned. The team had established a rhythm, a triangle of fire, and a pattern of relocation identical to what she had dismantled in Afghanistan. Klein entered the room behind her, noticing her sudden intensity. "What is it?" Elena didn't answer immediately. She traced the data points with her finger. "They're predictable," she said finally. "Almost exactly like the Ghost team. Someone is teaching the same methods. Someone is copying them." Klein frowned. "You mean someone's trying to replicate what you ended?" "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but hard. "And if we don't act fast, people will die." The first plan she proposed was aggressive. Insert field teams to monitor potential nests, coordinate drones, and intercept without engagement if possible. Klein raised concerns about jurisdiction, protocol, and international law, but Elena's urgency carried weight. She had the credibility, and this was her first chance to translate battlefield instinct into bureaucratic action. Her team spent days analyzing data, tracing communications, and plotting possible courses of action. Elena watched the patterns emerge like a living diagram, her mind dancing across them with the same precision she had used to track the Ghost team. Finally, she laid out her recommendation. "We can prevent their first strike if we predict their movement windows accurately. The triangles will be exposed. I can calculate the intercepts." A young analyst spoke up, nervous. "You really think it'll work? You've never even met them." Elena's eyes locked on him. "I've met the pattern. That's enough. Within weeks, the plan was approved. Using drones, satellite feeds, and predictive models, Elena's calculations guided operatives to positions where they could intercede without firing a shot, just like her first principle in the desert: stop death before it starts. The first engagement came at night, in a city that never slept. Operatives moved silently, intercepted the sniper team during their relocation, and dismantled their nests without firing a shot. Lives were saved. Elena watched the live feed, heart thudding, the same adrenaline she had felt at Carr's Ridge coursing faintly through her veins. Klein leaned beside her, amazed. "You did it." "No blood." Elena exhaled slowly. "No bullets." Same result. For the first time, she allowed herself a small, fragile satisfaction. The lessons she had learned in the mountains, the patience, the observation, the rhythm had translated into a tool that could save many, not just one. Yet, beneath that satisfaction, she felt a shadow of unease. If someone had replicated the ghost team's methods, who else was watching, waiting, learning? And if they were out there, would her predictions be enough? The city slept below, oblivious to the invisible war being waged in the shadows. Elena stayed at her station long after the rest of the team left, eyes tracing every movement, every pattern, her mind a cathedral of probabilities. She had learned that survival required not only skill but constant vigilance. Outside, the night wind rattled the edges of the building, carrying a scent that reminded her of the desert. She smiled faintly, bitterly. The ghosts of Carr's Ridge had taught her more than she had wanted to know, but they had also prepared her for battles that no one else could see. She leaned back, rubbing her eyes, whispering to herself. 8 minutes changed 3 lives. Maybe now it can save hundreds. The echoes of her past of precision, patience, and silent observation were no longer a burden. They were tools. And Elena Ramirez, once a solitary sniper in a desert, was now a sentinel against shadows that few even knew existed. Months passed, and Elena had fully transitioned into her new role as the sentinel of the unseen battlefield. Carr's Ridge was now a memory folded deep in her mind, a blueprint of lessons that guided every calculation, every prediction. The desert, the wind, and the mountain echoes were gone, replaced by screens, satellites, and intelligence reports. Yet for Elena, the rhythm of danger was the same: movement, pattern, timing. And somewhere in the shadows, someone was learning the same deadly lessons she had once dismantled with a rifle. It was late one night when the alert came through. A pattern she had predicted had begun to unfold. A new sniper cell, mimicking the ghost team's methodology, was preparing to strike a crowded urban zone. The targets were civilians, not soldiers, and the intelligence indicated that the team was equipped with advanced optics and high-caliber rifles. Every detail screamed familiarity: triangular firing positions, staggered rotation, and time-stamped movements almost identical to Carr's Ridge. Elena studied the feed, her eyes moving across the lines, the heat maps, the predicted vectors. Klein leaned over her shoulder, silent for once, watching the meticulous calculations unfold on the screen. "It's eerily similar," he said. "Not eerily," Elena corrected. "Exactly. Someone is trying to recreate them, and they've learned from the mistakes the ghost team made. They'll be efficient, lethal, and arrogant. But patterns can always be broken." She drew a clean map on a tablet, connecting nodes like she had done in the mountains, tracing predicted movement paths with precise timing. Every second, every angle, every shift in position was calculated, leaving no room for error. The team would not fire unless it was unavoidable. Her goal was interception and prevention. The first operational briefing was tense. Elena addressed a room of analysts, intelligence officers, and field operatives, her voice steady but urgent. This isn't Carr's Ridge. These are not soldiers we can predict with a bullet alone. But the principles remain. Patterns exist. We exploit them, and we can stop deaths before they occur. Timing will be everything. The field operatives, veterans of countless missions, listened intently. They respected Elena, not just for her history, but for the cold precision with which she dissected risk and movement. One analyst raised a question. What if the team anticipates us? Elena's eyes narrowed. Then we adapt faster than they do. Prediction isn't magic, it's attention. Every habit, every repetition, every rhythm is a potential point of leverage. They think like shadows. I think like the observer of shadows. The operation began under the cover of darkness. Elena's team monitored the urban landscape through drones, thermal scopes, and live feed cameras. Every intersection, alleyway, and rooftop was mapped for potential sniper positions. She ran predictive models continuously, recalculating with each subtle shift. The new Ghost team began their setup just as her calculations had predicted, moving in staggered positions across 3 rooftops, positioning tripods and adjusting optics with the meticulous arrogance of trained killers. Elena felt a familiar thrill, not of violence, but of clarity, the same precise focus that had guided her rifle at Carr's Ridge. She instructed the operatives in hushed tones. Their movements synchronized to her predictions. Drones adjusted angles to cover blind spots. Communication nodes were shifted to intercept signals. Field operatives positioned themselves at predicted relocation points. Every element was in place. Then the first shock rang out. The bullet struck a metal railing, missing civilians by inches. Elena's eyes never left the feed. She calculated the subsequent movement triangular rotation, staggered delay, repositioning, and her team moved like clockwork. The second sniper attempted to adjust. Her predictions anticipated the shift, and the field operatives reached intercept positions in time to disable him without lethal force. The final member, realizing his team had failed, tried to escape across the rooftops. Elena ran a predictive algorithm in real time, calculating velocity, jump angles, and potential cover. A specialized field operative intercepted him mid-route, disarming him before any shot could be fired. 8 minutes had passed. Once again, the rhythm of prediction and human ingenuity had triumphed over lethal precision. But this time, no lives were lost. Civilians remained unharmed. Back at the command center, Elena exhaled, the weight of success settling into her shoulders. Klein approached cautiously, a rare smile crossing his face. You did it. Not a single casualty. You've rewritten what we thought possible. Elena didn't answer immediately. Her eyes lingered on the rooftop feeds, noting the traces of movement, the faint impressions in gravel and concrete that marked where danger had been. She murmured, almost to herself, patterns can be broken, but only if someone sees them first. Mason, who had been transferred to assist in the operation's oversight, placed a hand on her shoulder. You've done more than stop one team. You've taught us a new way to fight. Not with bullets, but with foresight. Elena finally turned to him, her expression unreadable. It's not teaching yet. It's just a start. There will always be another pattern, another rhythm. My job isn't to end every threat. It's to make sure someone sees it before it ends others. Her gaze returned to the feeds. She saw not just the threat neutralized, but the faint shadows of human behavior, endlessly repeating, endlessly teachable. The operation had proven something she had suspected all along. Strategy, observation, and prediction could be as lethal as a rifle, but infinitely more humane. The days that followed were quieter. The city remained safe, civilians unaware of how close they had come to catastrophe. Elena spent her hours refining algorithms, mentoring analysts, and reviewing field reports. She noticed subtle changes in the operatives she trained, more attentiveness, sharper intuition, a deeper respect for the invisible rhythms of human behavior. Late one night, alone in the operations room, she opened her journal. The pages were filled with diagrams, time-stamped coordinates, wind and motion calculations. But now, she added something new: notes on human decision-making, psychology, and anticipation. She realized her work had evolved. She was no longer just a sniper predicting movement. She was a sentinel, guarding against death before it could manifest. A message pinged on her screen, an encrypted note from Klein.